I'll call the meeting to order. My name is Eleanor Blackman, City of Champaign, and I'm proxy for Dorothy David, Champaign City Manager today. The agenda says roll call 2, so I guess Carol.
I'm here.
And I think we only roll call the chair people. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Next agenda item is approval of the minutes of previous meetings. That would be the March 16th meeting minutes, and we had some corrections to what was distributed, and those corrections were correcting the name of who called the meeting to order, which was Miss David, not Miss Mitten. And we had some confusion on time on the minutes. The meeting ran from 3 p.m. to 3:12. And Scott will have corrected minutes on file.
Very good. With those changes. And then you would need to second, Eleanor.
Second.
And then you need to call for a roll call vote.
I call for a roll call vote.
Yes.
Alderman Blackman.
Yes. The motion passes. The next agenda item is additions to the agenda. Do we have any additions?
No.
Which brings us to public input.
I don't see any public out there.
No, we're it.
Which takes us to agenda item 5, presentations, and the first one up is co-director's report. Scott.
All right, I'm gonna screen share that.
You're on that mic, so you need to throw it.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna screen share.
Hey, I don't see, oh, I was saying I don't see me on there.
Oh, your image?
You are there, Nick.
Yeah, maybe if we can turn on a camera. Okay, anyway, let's just go through this report real quick. The solar developer has mostly finished grading activities. They're actually, most of the grading involves them bringing in rock to build pedestals for the eventual racking. So they're not actually pushing dirt around, which is probably safer for our cap, so that's good. They have also begun bringing in, stockpiling concrete ballast that will hold down the racking, which will be holding the solar panels. And then they'll be bringing in the racking more or less contemporaneously, perhaps following that. We have done some work on the solar-powered leachate collection system. We've repaired the pump. We've repaired some seals on the force main as the piping leaves the pump and goes underground. We've had a vendor out there blowing air through the pipe to make sure that it's clear. And we turned the pump on again, ran it for a few days, and leachate is not reaching the sewer line. We have essentially nothing left to repair, I believe, except to run new force main. So there may be incidents where force main is compacted or crushed, or hard to say. There's a leak somewhere. There is a manhole way between the pump and the sewer, and so we can run half the line and then connect it up and see if leachate then makes it to the sewer line. So we don't necessarily have to replace the entire, I think it's 700 feet of force main at once, because they're two different sections anyway. We can do one section and see if that's the one damaged. So I'm putting together some bid specs with some help with engineering, and I'd like to get that job done this fiscal year. We had originally budgeted money for replacing a sampling well, but we were waiting for the the solar developer to potentially, improve some roads out there for us before we did that. I think this is more urgent, and Nick might comment on that later when he gets to the report. So that's one element going on. I've also, I've got some photos in here. These aren't like great before and after photos, but those are before conditions of the landfill. I said they're not great because I didn't stand in the exact same spot facing the same distance direction. And then here are some after photos of what the landfill looks like. So a lot of woody vegetation removed at the solar developer's expense. So that's great. I also have some other photos that occurred after the packet went out. Screen share this. These are a little more striking because I got the same direction. So there is, this is at the gate at Smith Road, looking, that's the fence line, and there is kind of there is intentional swale, I think, there. And then that's, let me switch. Let's switch. Hold on. And that's the after condition. So part of the reason we chose this particular area is at the far end, there's actually another gate. It's disused, but Nick and I have discussed the potential of using that as an entry point for the drill crew rather than going the long way from the west. So we've cleared a lot of this vegetation. And my goal is to just do this incrementally and improve the condition. What you're looking at here, as I mentioned, the fence line, a swale, and then we've cleared to the bottom of the slope. There is a slope that goes up 20 feet elevation, and that slope is all woody vegetation. But then you get to the landfill where it's being leased and it's all been cleared. This is a big clear area, a woody slope, and now at least our swale is cleared. So, some good progress there.
Yeah, if I may, coming in along that east side fence is really good to put the replacement well in for 4G 105. We don't even have to go all the way to where 4G 105 currently is. We used to use a private well, just on the east side of that fence at that private property. We used to sample that and use it as a check well. But it turned out there's some issues that involved with the pump itself. I mean, with the installation there. And then we just decided, let's not be dealing with private property to do this. But the point is that anywhere, any place really along that east line, the further north you can go, the better. But as long as we have access back in there, if we want to make a replacement well, we're in the right geological position to do what we want to do. That's the whole thing. The problem with where 4G 105 is now is that the only decent access, you have to sample it, is by entering in off the interstate at the exit ramp at that point, University. And that's, first of all, not very legal, according to DOT could jump all over us if they wanted to. They haven't yet, but it also restricts what we can do. If we can get in there, drill a well, then we can also go back there with the proper equipment to do anything we want for sampling. So that's the whole idea about getting that cleared out.
Another nice element of that entrance point is it keeps this operation away from the LRC and the solar and all that, so different people get their own access points. So the big idea here and the goal is to spend some money trying to get this leachate pump up and running very quickly, and then potentially spend some money doing some road improvements at this other access point in this fiscal year. And then, as you see in the budget, we're budgeting again that same amount to replace that sampling well in the next fiscal year.
Okay.
It's gonna be a not insignificant road improvement. It's pretty soggy in that southeast corner, so we're gonna need a fair amount of rock to get a road improvement. And that road, the improvement's gonna have to go for some distance before you really get into high and dry ground. And we're pinned in a little bit there because the solar developers got a fence line in their lease area. You know, eventually there's a silt fence there now, eventually there's gonna be a chain link fence. So that's reducing, you know, where we can travel. Okay.
While we're on that subject, in a conversation that Scott and I had, just a casual conversation some time ago, one of the things that we could talk about is there's, of course, money that's been set aside to do this new monitoring well. But if that amount of money can be carried, be added, or also be included in the next fiscal budget, what we could be doing as well, which is very important, maybe more important than the new well, is to be decommissioning and abandoning the wells we're not using, because they just end up being, you know, a problem. So that's something I think we could probably discuss aside from this meeting. But that is another thing that I certainly, as the hydrogeologist, would approve of and encourage. So either way, whether we get a new well in time or we use monies to abandon and decommission the wells we're not using, those are both, I think, of equal importance.
You know, originally my intention, my expectation was the solar was going to develop a lot sooner in the year. And we would get my intention was to get the sampling well replaced this fiscal year. Next fiscal year, keep budgeting that money for several well abandonments every year, until we work through all of them that we're not using anymore, that we don't need to use, and which will probably take a few fiscal years, I think, to work through. Okay, but it's definitely, as Nick said, we've talked about it. It's the intention. They just present problems. Somebody can run into them with a piece of equipment. They're a pathway for contaminants to get down into the shallow aquifer. So best practice is to fill them with bentonite, I think, and then cut them off a few feet below grade. Great. That's it for me.
Any additional questions for Scott?
Not for me.
Okay, next is the consultant's report, which I assume is Nick with the annual report.
Yeah, well, okay, we're not going to show anything unless Scott wants to display anything from that report, but I don't think we need to. It's first of all, we can just say that there's I'll just start off by saying there's been no indication of any impact to groundwater in the Glassford Formation, which is our target geologic formation, because it's the first real potable water source and potential public water source. So that's what we monitor, and there's been no impact to there. You'll notice that on page 4 and 5, I had a table with what we called exceedances from what we established as kind of target marks. I'm going to point out an error. It's my error. And when I looked at it again today, I said, that can't be right. So in table 1, you'll see that under 5G 101, you'll see that there's for arsenic, 5G 102. For arsenic, it said that it's in bold. There's a figure in there, 21.1, which everything else suggests that it was 28.1 milligrams per liter. Well, Nick must have been sleeping, because that's 28.1 micrograms per liter. So that is much lower than the limit of 10 milligrams per liter. So you can erase that, cross it out, put in an ugly face of mine, and just say Nick screwed up. So that's it for that. So what the rest of those exceedances in the bold, if you'll notice over at the so-called limit, those are simply minor exceedances. And when we set a limit, target. Some of those targets were statistically developed, and I use an equation, let's call it an algorithm or an equation developed by the EPA statistical people that we use to establish those limits. And it has all to do with the variability around a mean, around the average. And sometimes that has to be adjusted. I've seen consultant firms with different landfills turn into the EPA, I don't know, time after time, redo, because it varies and it will vary over time. So when you see something like 3.57 iron, I don't even consider a pollutant, frankly, but you see there, you see on iron, yeah, a 3.57 in the second quarter for 6G102. And you see that I established a limit of 2.85. That was a statistically established limit. But you also see that all of the other, well, you wouldn't see it, but you'll see everybody else does not have that kind of exceedances. So you just have to use kind of common sense. For example, manganese, which is naturally occurring, and I'm not sure what the number would really be, but so 0.158 is basically 8 thousandths above what we established as the limit. And 0.15 is also the class 1 groundwater limit or a target. So we're looking both at whether we're exceeding class 1 groundwater, which is what glass reclamation water is, or if we're exceeding some arbitrary limit that we put together. But the point is that there was nothing of any major consequence in these exceedances. I report them because that's what we're supposed to do. In surface water, actually the water got cleaner downstream for some reason, probably from the addition of base flow from both banks of the stream in there, which diluted whatever issues were in there. I didn't put any values in there because basically nothing was exceeded. So in the past, where the water seemingly well, actually the water used to get cleaner even when the EPA had us looking at it and saying that we were polluting, which we were. And then the last thing I talked about was about the seepage and leachate conditions, and Scott kind of addressed a little bit of that in terms of we're trying to reduce the volume of leachate in the 24 17-acre sites. And now we really want to do that so that the solar farm thing doesn't start tipping around too much up there. It's also conceivable and probable, we might consider sometime in the future, not now, of adding another leachate extraction pump on the south side of the 24-acre site. There has been seepage there for a long time. For various reasons, it's down gradient from the second lift of trash that was placed on that area. So it's probably hitting some of the leachate that's been developed from the trash itself, hits a sub-clay cover that was originally on that site. I don't know if I've made this clear, but originally they brought in trash and they covered it as though they were not going to put any more trash in there. And then they wanted to use it again. So instead of developing a new site, which they eventually did anyway, they simply got a permit to do another lift of trash on the 24-acre site. And they did that, but they put that on top of a standard clay layer. So that is preventing any leachate from going much deeper than the top 10 feet or so. So it wants to get out and is trying to get out on the south side and is, but it's not that noticeable. No one's ever said too much about it. And now you got the solar farm in there, and they're kind of covered up some of that actually. And then we have the 10-acre site, which we're watching. We take monthly leachate levels to see what's going on there, because there's been evidence on the site of both gas and liquid coming out. It's not a major concern, but it's why we cleared the site of woody plants mostly. And at some point, we're going to try to put some fill in some holes that are up there. Other than that, that's about it. I think the addition of the solar facility, I think, is a good thing, because what it's actually done, it's actually made a better cap on top of the 24 and 17-acre sites, which again limits some of the infiltration that might occur and has been occurring because of depressions that had formed, and they filled in those depressions. So the instance of putting more liquid into the trash has been reduced considerably.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions for Nick?
Yeah, one last thing, now that I see you have here. Scott, can you go to the next diagram? Yeah. I include this. This is I think of interest, at least from a more of a community perspective. You can see that for many years, and I've started this only from 2000, although I have data from since 1993. But you can see that the head, what we call the hydraulic head, that is where we're in the Glassford Formation. This is really the actual head, not even, it's a potentiometric head. So it's the level to which groundwater is coming up in one of the wells. And so that that center line there is a polynomial regression line. And it simply smooths out the data from the average of the wells. And this is how you can really look at the hydrogeological conditions in a geologic formation. In general terms, you can see this is all synchronous. It goes down, it comes up. What's very interesting is this, when this all started in the early, let's say 2010 or whatever it is, started coming back up, is about the time that Illinois Water Company began to reduce their extraction from the Glassford Formation, from under Lincoln facility. And now it's closed, as you know, and that groundwater head is coming up. So what it's really reflecting is all of the time that it was low was reflecting the pumping of public water supply. And now that they're not doing that, you're seeing a rebound in the groundwater in that formation. I just think it's interesting from a community perspective.
It is interesting. Is there any reason to, is there a point at which that becomes problematic or anything, or is it all fine that the groundwater level is going up?
Oh, I think it's good. I think it's good.
It's good for rural folks who might have a potable well or an irrigation well in the shallow aquifer. There's no wells in shallow aquifer in the city, but for rural folks, that's good.
Yeah, it just means that what it really in a long-term deal, what you would say, this groundwater is going to end up, this area here is a kind of a tributary, a groundwater tributary even of the Mahomet Aquifer. So the fact that the head here is going up, that means it can continue to recharge the Mahomet Aquifer in this area. So, and that's really the community interest, I would say. So that it's, we don't think of this as the Mahomet Aquifer, and it isn't per se, but it is a tributary to that in that kind of terms. Don't think of it so much as a channel tributary, but more as a permeability transmissivity. In other words, the whole found the whole formation is responding this way, and it responds, and it will work itself down into the Bahama. Okay, I've said too much already.
Thanks for pointing that out. I wouldn't have understood that otherwise.
Did I miss something?
I just said thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions for Nick? Okay, agenda item 6 is unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? Scott says no. Which agenda item 7 is change in Champagne's co-director. As speaking with my Champagne co-director hat, I'll be retiring the end of June, and thus I will no longer be Champagne's co-director. And Alex Naj, who's on the call, will take over.
Yep, that's the plan.
So I finally have driven Eleanor to retirement. She's had enough of me.
Drive you to retirement.
I can't afford to retire.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about retiring when I retired, but that was several years ago when it was off in time. So
Well, congratulations, Eleanor.
thank you.
And thanks for all your support, Professor. It's been really important to me.
Your fellow co-director is shedding a tear here.
Just thinking I might need a little coaching next meeting myself on meeting protocols here.
No
Well,
worries.
usually you don't have to run the meeting. This is the first time I've run the meeting. You just have to be present and available for discussion. So that brings us to agenda item 8, resolution approving a budget for fiscal year 2022. And we had resolution 2021-04 sent out earlier. I just want to note we noticed that it was showing 2 years for the 2022 fiscal year. And yes, Scott corrected that date where he's moving the cursor. It did have 2020 instead of 2021.
Okay. I would move approval of resolution number 2021-04.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, I think we have to have a roll call, actually. So Scott's gonna call roll.
Carolyn,
Aye.
Eleanor Blackman,
Aye. Motion passes. We have anything else on that item? I guess I should have allowed for discussion or Scott to present it, but it was sent out earlier.
well, I mentioned this is essentially a carryover of all the previous year's numbers. You'll see that as is our practice, we've added 2% for inflation on all those items. The $20,000 for well replacement is carried over. We'll spend some of that in this current fiscal year, as I mentioned, on road improvement and leachate pump repairs, and then hopefully be doing that sampling well replacement in this coming fiscal year. Everything else is the same. We also, based on input from the two cities, we're foregoing city contributions again this coming fiscal year. The university will, of course, be doing their reimbursement for the expenditures of the previous year.
I'm good.
No further discussion on that. It brings us to item 9, announcements.
I don't have anything.
I think I've made all my announcements.
I'm not retiring. I'm not retiring.
When do we get to have cake, Eleanor?
Maybe never. I don't know. Are we going to be back in the office by the end of June?
I don't know, but we could, okay.
I'm not really a cake person. Maybe we'd have to have pie or something, cookies instead.
I'm flexible.
My direction to my department is I don't want a celebration. I just want to slide out of there.
All right, we'll leave.
Yep. But I will share contact information. You'll probably see me around town.
I think that Eleanor wants to start practicing her fly fishing. I know that she worked on that a year or so ago, and I haven't heard about any trout that have been caught yet. So we'll wait to hear that.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, especially if you're not catching anything, you don't get any reinforcement for your efforts.
Well, it's definitely a skill that requires practice. More so than just throwing out a spinning rod.
An art, actually.
Hmm?
Almost an art.
Yeah, I agree. So our last agenda item is adjournment. If we have a motion.
I move to adjourn.
A second.
And I'll call a roll.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes. We are adjourned.